welcome back to our next lesson. I've chosen today to take this video in front of St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Jersey City. This is the church where I served my year-long internship many years ago and where I was eventually ordained. But that's not why I came here. I came to St. Paul's Lutheran Church because this is the section on the Pauline writings. Imagine for a moment that 13 out of the 27 books in the New Testament were written or attributed to Paul. In addition to that, Paul also comes up as a major figure in the book of Acts. And so it seems that Paul has a major part in putting together the New Testament. And so it will be interesting to talk about Paul's work. But let me just recap some of the things that you already had in some of the previous lessons. So who was Paul before we go into some of the writings themselves? We know most of this from the book of Acts or from things he said himself in his letters. He was born in Tarsus, a town in the southeastern part of Asia Minor. He was born to a Greek father, and that's why he probably easily picked up the Greek language. That's why he grew up in Tarsus, where people spoke Greek, and he was educated in Greek philosophy and Greek writings. But his mother was Jewish, and because the mother in the Jewish religion determines the religion of the children, Paul, who at that time was still named Saul, was a Jewish person by religion. Saul, of course, was a famous name as King Saul, the very first king in the Old Testament that was anointed by Samuel the prophet. And while he, as a child, grew up in Tarsus, when he grew older, he was sent to Jerusalem to specifically learn about Judaism. He came into the school of Gamaliel, who was a famous Pharisaic school where he studied the Old Testament, the scriptures of the Old Testament, and where he became very familiar with Hebrew, and he became a very strong proponent of Pharisaism. Of course, we know from the stories already what happened. When the Jesus movement came up, he was adamant against the Jesus movement and was out to root it out, to make sure it ends. And so we have that story that you already heard about his experience on the road to Damascus when he was struck by the light of Jesus on the road with the question, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And so, as you know from the previous sections already, he at that point had a total turnaround and became a strong proponent for Jesus. He didn't immediately present himself to the apostles in Jerusalem. He has gone first into the desert for a little while to kind of see and understand the experience that he had. And then he finally came to Jerusalem to present himself to Peter and James and John and Andrew and some of the other leaders of the Jerusalem church. I don't know, imagine for a moment what that would have been like to meet these apostles when he was known as a huge persecutor of the Jesus movement. And imagine also what the apostles must have felt when Saul finally came to visit with them. Well, they did believe that the experience was genuine. They did not necessarily want him to work with them in Jerusalem, and so they sent him up to Antioch, not far from Tarsus, but a little bit further east from Tarsus. And in Antioch, there was already a pretty vibrant congregation who actually had begun also to take in non-Jewish followers. And this is where Paul began his ministry, and where he also became a strong proponent for saying that the new people that are not from Jewish background should be welcomed into the community without circumcision and without having to keep the kosher food laws and kosher rules. But he didn't stay in Antioch. The church in Antioch at one point sent him and another co-worker, the name of Barnabas, sent him to bring the word of Jesus into other places. And here you can pick up the story from a video that I took earlier for our class in the Religions of the World class. Paul decided not to stay in Antioch, but the church in Antioch commissioned him and Barnabas to go out and spread the news to other places. And so Paul went on many missionary trips. He began first in the region of Asia Minor, or in Galatia, where he visited many different towns and places. Every time he went to a town, he first came to the synagogue to preach to the Jewish people about the new Messiah, Jesus, and why it was important to follow him. Gentiles also came to it, and very soon the church grew more and more with both Jews and Gentiles. Paul went on several mission trips. After he returned from the first one through Galatia, he embarked from Antioch to go further, again through Galatia and then all the way up into Greece to Philippi and Thessalonica. He tried his luck in Athens, but he failed there because people were interested in all the different philosophies, but they weren't following him. Eventually he comes to Corinth. From Corinth he continues back to Ephesus. They're making a collection, sending money to the congregation in Jerusalem. Good question about money here, right? How did Paul finance all this? He did not ask congregations to give money to him. He supported himself. How did he make a living and travel like this? He was a tent maker. And so every time he went to a town, he settled down first. He started his business. He built tents and sails, especially because he went on boats many times also. And so it was important to sell sails. For example, Corinth was a wonderful, bustling city with a lot of commerce, with a lot of diverse people from all over the Roman Empire. He settled there and he made his business. He sold his tents and sails, made his money, and in the meantime he was preaching in the newly established churches. And when he went away, those churches needed to know what it means to be Christian. Remember, there was no Bible yet. There was not a thing written yet for the New Testament. It was only the Old Testament. And how would the new Christians behave? How should they make decisions? What was it like to be church? And so they oftentimes asked Paul in letters how they should do this and that, and Paul would write back. And it developed a whole body of work of letters of Paul, written by Paul, that were sent to the congregations to give them instructions, to give them teaching, and to help them with everyday decisions. All these letters, 13 of them out of the 27 books in the New Testament, eventually became part of the New Testament. Written between the early 50s and into the early 60s, Paul's letters are becoming the earliest writings of the New Testament. Paul returns once more to Jerusalem to deliver the collection that was taken up by the churches in Greece and everywhere around for the leaders in Jerusalem. But there he is arrested by the Pharisees and by the Sadducees because they now feel that Paul was working against them. But Paul can claim citizenship and therefore is allowed passage eventually to go all the way to Rome to see the emperor in Rome. If you read the book of Acts, you can see a wild story about his travels as a prisoner on the ship to Rome, where he shipwrecks on an island of Malta, but eventually is in Rome under house arrest, but pretty free to talk with the Christians that were already living in Rome. The Roman emperor was Nero at this time, who was kind of a crazy guy. He set the city of Rome on fire claiming that this was done by the Jews and by the Christians, and that gave him permission to persecute the Christians. It was under this persecution that Paul eventually also lost his life. He was decapitated sometime between the year 64 to 67 under the reign of Nero. So now, after learning a little bit more about Paul, now it's time to turn to his writings. We should consider and know that the earliest and the oldest writings of the Old Testament are actually letters by St. Paul. So we will start looking into the books of Galatians and Romans, where we find most of his theology. We will look into the letters to the Corinthians, which show some very interesting practical ways of how his ministry worked and how he developed the ideas for Christianity. And we will look into some more personal letters like Timothy and the letter to Onesimus. Of course, there are so many more letters, but we don't have time enough in this class to look into every letter individually. And so some of the other letters may be similar, but we will take a look at those that we just mentioned to learn more about who Paul was and what his great contribution was towards the New Testament and the development of Christianity. Until next time.